Hey everyone, let's jump right into session 1 of our explainer on how culture and language intertwine, looking specifically at the foundation of the American mosaic. If you're learning a language, or honestly just trying to figure out a new society, you probably already know that memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules, that's really only half the battle. To genuinely connect with people, you've got to understand the culture that actually breathes life into those words. So, this first session is going to be the bedrock for everything we cover next.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to take this massive concept and break it down step by step. We'll start with the language and culture coin, defining culture and why culture matters. Then we'll look at the invisible cultural elements, the visible products of culture, and finally, the American mosaic.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the language and culture coin.
So think about this for a second. Does perfect grammar actually equal perfect communication? Have you ever known all the exact right words to say, but still completely failed to connect with someone? You can put together a grammatically flawless sentence, like bluntly demanding a coffee in a culture that expects, say, 5 solid minutes of warm small talk first, and you'll completely miss the mark. You're speaking the language perfectly, but you are totally failing the cultural test.
There is this brilliant anecdote from a Californian barber that hits the nail on the head. He spent years cutting hair for a super diverse clientele, and over time, he noticed something fascinating. Immigrants would often come into a shop with textbook perfect English, yet genuine communication still just sort of broke down. Why? Well, an American might treat the barber's chair like a stage for small talk, debates, and sharing personal life stories, right? But someone from another culture might sit down expecting absolute silence and strict professionalism. Vocabulary alone just cannot bridge that invisible gap when your underlying cultural assumptions are completely different.
Which brings us to the crucial takeaway for Session 1. Language and culture, they are literally two sides of the exact same coin. You just can't have one without the other. Language acts as a mirror reflecting the traditions, social norms, and the history of the people speaking it. By studying the culture, you unlock the actual, real-world meaning behind the words. That's what gives you the insight to navigate all those tricky little nuances.
Moving right along to Section 2, defining culture.
I know culture sounds highly abstract, but fundamentally, it's the operating system of a society. It's this incredibly complex system of shared norms, traditions, and institutions that define a society's standards for behavior. It's the ultimate rule book for what's considered right or wrong, normal or totally weird. It includes the deep-seated values a society holds dear, as well as the formal institutions they physically build to support those values, like their specific education systems, legal frameworks, and even law enforcement.
But it goes way beyond just rules and institutions. Culture also wraps up shared arts, architecture, music, and the movies that make up popular culture. It's a massive reflection of collective human achievement. Actually, fun fact, even the explosive popularity of specific movie genres, like superhero films in the US, is a cultural byproduct. It reflects deeply held societal values of individualism, justice, and, always rooting for the underdog. These are socially driven achievements that just spread like wildfire through the population. And what makes this operating system so complex is how it layers. You can have one overarching mainstream culture that sets a nation's dominant norms. But look closely at a place like the United States, which is famously a melting pot, and you'll see a mainstream national identity living right alongside incredibly rich immigrant subcultures. Hispanic, Chinese, or Italian communities, for example, bring their own unique identities and traditions, and they weave them directly into that broader mainstream mix. It's pretty amazing.
Okay. Let's jump to Section 3, Why Culture Matters.
So, why does all this matter? Because culture heavily influences absolutely everything we do. This is a huge theme for our explainer today. Culture dictates our daily habits, from whether you're supposed to take your shoes off inside the house to exactly how you celebrate a birthday. It shapes our preferences and our deeply ingrained views of what is or isn't appropriate. On a macro level, it literally builds the politics, the laws we enforce, and the societal rules we all just implicitly agree to follow.
But what happens when you confidently walk into a conversation with your own set of hidden rules, only to realize the other person is playing by an entirely different rulebook?
Well, even the tiniest, most subtle differences in those established norms can cause a totally unexpected culture clash. You might be using perfect English vocabulary, for sure. But if you violate a hidden cultural rule about personal space, like standing just an inch too close to someone in an elevator, or if you misunderstand the classic American mantra that time is money, your polite interaction can instantly turn incredibly awkward.
That leads us perfectly into Section 4, the invisible cultural elements. Culture is a lot like an iceberg. The most powerful, dangerous forces are the ones completely hidden beneath the surface. These invisible elements include things like varying communication styles. Like, is it okay to interrupt someone with enthusiasm, or do you have to wait for a long, polite pause? It includes societal and family roles, personal rituals, and deeply held values about money and independence. For a language learner, these unwritten rules dictate exactly what people expect from you long before you even open your mouth.
Which brings us to Section 5, Visible Products of Culture.
When those invisible underwater elements finally rise above the surface, they crystallize into visible products. This is the tip of the iceberg we can actually see, hear, and taste. In the US, for sports, you get the massive cultural phenomenon of football, basketball, and baseball. In music, you have distinctly American creations like jazz, R&B, and country. Entertainment gives us Hollywood blockbusters. Traditions give us huge Thanksgiving feasts and regional foods. And symbols cover everything from local dialects to iconic landmarks.
So when you're watching a Hollywood movie or listening to a spontaneous jazz improvisation or sitting down to carve a turkey at Thanksgiving, you're not just consuming food or entertainment. You are actually looking at the tangible outputs of America's hidden values. Its rugged individualism, its history of immigration, and its incredibly rich, complex regional identities. That is exactly why understanding this stuff matters so much.
Finally, let's hit Section 6, the American Mosaic.
This right here is the roadmap for the rest of our journey. As we move beyond this first session, we're going to piece together this American mosaic step by step. We're going to explore jazz and American music, dive deep into regional dialects and accents, and taste some incredibly diverse cuisines, from Southern comfort food to Tex-Mex. We'll analyze the cultural impact of major sports like baseball and the Super Bowl, unpack Hollywood's global reach, and finally, tour historic landmarks and national parks.
By understanding both the visible tip and the invisible depths of the cultural iceberg, you really gain the empathy you need for true, meaningful communication. Because it's not just about learning a language, it's about decoding a people. So as we wrap up Session 1 of this explainer, I want to leave you with this. Which piece of this mosaic are you most excited to explore next? And honestly, what invisible cultural rule might you be breaking right now without even knowing it?